Welcome back to Swordbox Ministries for our Tuesday message. Today Mickey continues with the story of the prodigal son. Our verse for today is Acts 26:18. To open their eyes, in order to turn them from darkness to light, and from the power of Satan to God, that they may receive forgiveness of sins.
The paths of earthly wisdom, forgive me for my unbelief. Renew the fire.
We've been talking about forgiveness, and we started talking about the parable of the prodigal son yesterday. When we left off, he had gotten to the point where he was feeding pigs, and he was hungry. Things were not going good. He had spent all of his money. His rebellion had left him in a very bad place. And down in verse 17 of chapter 15, it says, "But when he came to himself, he said, How many of my father's hired servants have bread enough to spare, and I perish with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants." And I just want to focus on verse 17 more than anything. It says, "But when he came to himself," at some point he had to get pretty far down before he began to realize, what? I have really messed up. And maybe you've gotten to that point in your life, and you didn't intend to be there. You didn't set off to be in the far country, but you got around the wrong friends, or your heart got broken, and you got disillusioned about who God was, and God didn't come through for you the way you thought God should come through for you. And somehow your heart began to get hard, and you begin to drift further and further away from this God who loves you and cares for you, and who at one time you were in love with. And now you're in that far country, and like we talked about yesterday, sin is a cancer. It doesn't just stay the same. It gets worse and worse and worse. And now maybe you found yourself feeding pigs. You're in the slop of life. You're in the sin of life, and everywhere you look, it just seems like there's nowhere to go. You've hit bottom. That's not such a bad place to be. That's a great time where you could come to yourself and realize, what? This is not what God intended for me. This is not where I should be. And that's what happened to this young man. He came to himself, and he began to realize, even being a servant in my father's house is better than this. Even his servants, people that aren't even his sons, are treated better and have a better life than what I have right now. And maybe if I go back to him and throw myself at his mercy, maybe he will be compassionate enough to let me be a servant. He was in a really good place. But you know what? If he would have stopped right there, it wouldn't have been enough. If he would have just came to himself and stayed right where he was, things would have never changed for him. And tomorrow we're going to see how coming to himself led to something more, because what was happening in this young man was real. And when God begins to convict you when you're in that low place, when you're at bottom, that's time you need to begin to pray, and you need to begin to look to Jesus, and you need to begin to take inventory of where you're at, and find out what you need to do to get back where God wants you to be. I hope you'll come back tomorrow. I hope you'll continue to follow us with this story of the prodigal son and God's awesome forgiveness. God is always waiting to forgive you. He never moves away from you. You're the one that moved away from him, or I'm the one that moves away from him to get in that far country. It's not where God wants you. He wants you in close, intimate fellowship with himself.